Welcome to Season 4 of the Books Brothers podcast, a group of friends from college who have stayed in touch through this book club. We read books together and each week discuss various chapters, reflect on them as they relate to our life, and connect with each other by sharing our experiences. I'm Garrett.
I'm Stalen.
I'm Flez.
I'm Thomas.
And I'm Rob.
Our new book this season is The Psychology of Money, Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness by Morgan Housel. The last couple of books we've read and discussed focus primarily on physical and emotional well-being to promote happier, longer lives. For this book, we'll dive into another integral aspect that affects each person's life, health, and happiness: money. In today's episode, we will explore the initial chapters of the book: the introduction, The Greatest Show on Earth, Chapter 1, No One's Crazy, and Chapter 2, Luck and Risk. So in the introduction, The Greatest Show on Earth, Housel sets the stage by describing money as not just a medium of economic exchange, but as a lens through which to view our behaviors, hopes, and fears. Money influences not only financial decisions, but also personal and emotional ones, making it a central theme in our lives and a spectacle as diverse and unpredictable as humanity itself. So, let's dive right in. Can one or two of you share a personal story about how a particular experience influenced your financial decisions or beliefs about money?
Yeah, I thought this chapter was interesting. I had written down a couple things, but obviously the behavior component was a big part of this chapter. I think a personal story, it's really more or less just like my upbringing, I would say. So my parents raised me really like we were middle class. We weren't rich by any means, but we weren't living paycheck to paycheck. We had food on the table, but they really showed me the value of money at a young age, whether that's mowing lawns. I think I had like 7-8 lawns that I mowed throughout the year. And then I went to work at Hy-Vee, pushing carts and slinging milk jugs in the dairy and frozen department. And I think my parents really, because they didn't pay for everything, I think my beliefs around money just at an early age were just that really just entering into that like saving mentality and almost a level of frugality. So I think there's kind of like a running joke maybe amongst some of us, but yeah, I mean, I'm always trying to look for the best deal so that my money can go the furthest. And so I'm somewhat economical, even frugal. Like right now, as I'm recording this, I'm in our perch and I'm sweating bullets right now because it's like 80 degrees in here and I'm too stubborn to turn the AC on because it's like, is it spring? Is it summer yet?
In your slow internet?
Yeah, are you sure that's not just your Wi-Fi router struggling to keep up with this stream? Producing a bunch of heat.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think I'm because of my upbringing, my parents taught me really to save. And so when I spend money, I think it's typically something that's more thought out rather than just whimsical. I'm going to buy this. I'm going to buy that. Like, I look at the reviews on things. If I'm going to purchase a product or if we're planning a vacation, I'm going to try and look for the best Airbnb or the best itinerary, literally hour by hour type of thing, just so that we can maximize how we spend our money.
Nice, man. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to and resonate with what you're saying about the family upbringing and stuff. I know one thing that Ruth and I found to be really helpful is really early on in our marriage, we went to financial peace class. That's the Dave Ramsey class. And I mean, obviously, I feel like he's a pretty like controversial guy, and there's a lot of people that have really strong opinions both ways with him. But at the time, we'd been married about 1.5 years, and I had just gotten my first job, like my first career job, and Ruth had been maybe working for a year, and that was really foundational for us because it was like a place we could like sit and talk about these conversations and do so in a room with other people, and particularly other older people who had been through some financial stress or such. And I think we often, we've been married almost 9 years now, and we go back to how helpful that was for us And it's not just that it was that class per se, but just that we had an opportunity to share and talk through how we were going to go about financial decisions. And I think having that was really an impetus for us. Going to that class was an impetus to like help us make decisions.
I got out of college and bought a bed.
And how did that particular experience influence your financial decisions or beliefs?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Essentially, when you get out of college, I feel like a lot of people make real money for the first time. And by real money, I mean like 40 grand a year. And so I got out and bought a bed thinking like, oh man, I don't even have to think about this. I can just buy a $1,500 bed and it'll be like the best bed I've ever slept in. All I've ever slept in is a twin bed that's a hand-me-down. And I'm going to get a queen. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to invest in something important, which is my sleep. And it was like the worst bed I had ever bought. It was so bad. Within like 6 months, there was a big divot where I slept that no matter what, I fell back into, and it was really uncomfortable. And it ended up giving it away like a year later. And I guess the moral of that story was like, just because you have money, number one, doesn't mean you should spend it. And especially not on something like, just because you're spending a lot of money doesn't mean you're getting something out of it too.
I bet you felt like king in the castle though with that.
Oh man, I felt like king of the, yeah, I did for a minute until like my sleep suffered. And then I was like, man, this was a big mistake. So I think like Rob was saying, in terms of analyzing your choices with money and not just making, I mean, that was kind of an emotional decision. I was really tired of a twin bed. I just wanted to get out of that thing and into a better situation. And I didn't really care about the quality or the financial consequences or whatever. And given, I mean, a bed's a hard thing to choose the right one before you've ever used one. But I just kind of remember that being one of the only real impulse buys I think I made, and it turned out poorly.
Well, yeah, I would have to say that COVID changed a lot of my beliefs about finances and shutting down a business during that time. I was a lot more bigger risk taker, which I guess that's going to be chapter 2, talking about, luck and risk more. But having failed in trying to start my own business has probably made me more risk averse after the fact. So being more weary, I guess, of how I'm delegating where my money goes and kind of having help and making sure I make better decisions with all of that. So that experience definitely changed that. So
that's great. Yeah, my mom was a financial advisor. So she, and my dad too, I just feel like growing up, I was taught and habits were formed in me at a young age to save, to tithe. So I remember this little plastic box that had 3 columns in it, like 3 separate spots. And when I'd get my weekly allowance, say it was like $10, I'd put $1 in the tithe, $1 in savings, and then got to spend $8. And then when the financial advisor piece, I remember my mom showing me that compounding graph of if you start a Roth IRA at 16 and you invest $2,000 for 10 years and stop at 26. And then if you start at age 20, but if you started at age 27 and invested $2,000 until retirement, you would have more if you invested the 20 grand from age 16 to 26. That always stuck with me. And she opened a Roth IRA for me. I didn't at that age and income and stuff. I did not put away $2,000 per year. I think I got to like, I invested 20 grand by the time I was like 28 or 29, but I do remember those things, and those stuck out to me. And now that I have kids and thinking about how to teach them about managing their finances someday, whether it's by little allowances in the near future or whatnot, I think those practices and parenting that I received were really impactful and had a big imprint on me.
How are you gonna teach any different? Like, are you gonna say, hey, if you put this in a Roth IRA, it could grow to this, but if you put it all in Bitcoin, it could go 2,000 times that? Like, are you gonna
To the moon.
I'm playing. But seriously, I mean, to what extent do you feel like you would change maybe the way that you? Because I mean, it's hard to, as a kid, it's hard to see a graph and be like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. I don't care about that.
Yeah, I think my kids are so young. I mean, one is 4 and the other is 2. So the 4-year-old's more the one where we go to a store and I want this, I want that. And he's gotten some money for his birthday and things like that. It's like, hey, you don't actually have enough to buy that. And he's like, but I want it. So I think even at a young age, maybe I'll wait till he's a teenager to show him the compounding graph when he actually has an opportunity to mow lawn, stuff like that. But I think at a young age, it may not actually be physical, like actual giving him cash, but developing habits of expectations that, hey, you help around the house. Like he loves to clean. He loves to sweep. We just got sand delivered to our house to help level out the backyard because there's a bunch of divots and stuff, and just the earth has settled and it's very uneven. Like we're going to have a broken ankle, and he just wants to shovel that sand, put it in the wheelbarrow, help me out. So I think the expectation of like, hey, we help around the house. And then as he gets older, like, developing some sort of allowance system for chores and things like that. So starting small with his age and competency levels and growing into something more. But I do feel like I will mimic a lot of the behaviors that I was taught. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would be dramatically different or altered at this point. I feel like my parents did really well. Probably no Bitcoin though at this point.
It feels like financial education as a kid is more of absorbed rather than taught by the things that they see or experience.
Well, I mean, and I think that like segues super well to like this first chapter that we got into, which I think it was just, I mean, I love that he started here.
Yeah, let's dive into it. Chapter 1's titled "No One's Crazy," which explains why personal finance seems simple in theory, yet is often difficult in practice. Housel argues that money-related decisions are deeply personal and driven by individual experiences and emotions rather than just logic. He emphasizes the importance of understanding that everyone's financial behavior is shaped by their unique personal history, which makes their choices rational in their own context. So an example that was very striking to me in the book was the 2 graphs on pages 15 and 16. So one of the graphs shows performance of the stock market over the course of one's teenage years and 20s if you were born in 1950 compared to if you were born in 1970. So it's dramatically different. So if you were born in 1950, when you were a teenager and in your 20s, you saw the stock market basically do nothing and not grow at all. If you were born in 1970, your experience as a teenager and in the 20s is the stock market grew tremendously. And then the second graph, which I thought was extremely humorous since almost all of us were born in 1990. And when he wrote this at 2020, who would have thought where we'd be at in 2024? But the graph on page 16 shows what inflation did to prices in your teens and 20s if you were born in 1960 compared to 1990. So inflation was extremely volatile and increased a lot. If you were born in 1960 and were a teenager, and if you were born in 1990 up until a couple of years ago, and I speak from experience, I had never even thought of inflation. And at the time that this book was written, inflation, for us as teens and in our 20s, probably never even crossed our minds. So he shows these graphs, and it really does illustrate how these 2 groups of people separated by only 1, maybe 2 generations will have dramatically different experiences and thus likely have different views of the stock market, inflation, etc., which will thus impact our own and others' financial decisions and worldview. So, how do you think recognizing these types of different experiences could change the way you and really anyone discuss and judge financial decisions made by others?
I thought the statistics just around the lottery tickets was pretty interesting. It said that 40% of Americans can't come up with $400, which is like super duper surprising statistic. I've heard more statistics around people living like paycheck to paycheck than I ever thought was actually realistic, or not realistic, but than what it was. But there was a line, I think it was on page 19, that, you know, it might seem crazy for someone that only has or less than $400 to their account or to their name, that they would spend their money on a lottery ticket. But there was the line, it was like, they are paying for a chance of a dream that we already have. So just the thought of being able to actually like take care of themselves better is worth spending money on, because of the offshot chance that they might actually hit the lottery. I just thought that was pretty striking. I really hadn't thought of it down to that level of like, wow, I'm technically like living a dream that a lot of Americans would prefer, but yet they're sinking their funds into just the chance to get maybe what we have.
Yeah. I think I alluded it to right before you went through the summary here, but I just really appreciate that in a book about finance that basically he's just talking about how some people are born with better understanding because of their family and their upbringing. And I think it's just really good to note whenever you're dealing with others. And I think for me, it was like that helpful reminder of like, again, the chapter titled like nobody's crazy, right? Like people do things because that's what they saw growing up and that's what they learned. And something that might look dumb to you or unintelligent, like it's how, you know, maybe someone grew up. Whereas like something that I might do, others on the outside might think is dumb, but I'm doing it because it's the way I grew up.
Rob, the $400 thing. Last year, I volunteered as they called them mentors in this financial literacy class. The company I work for, we partner with a nonprofit organization in one of the lower economic areas of the city in Oklahoma City. And one of the ways that they try to empower and build up the community there is offering financial literacy classes. It's not a Dave Ramsey class. It's a class that's tailored specifically for people in very low socioeconomic communities. And it was extremely humbling because I was in a class rubbing shoulders with people who the class that we discussed, having an emergency savings fund, the amount that this class taught was, hey, you need to work towards having a $500 emergency fund. And the table that I sat with, the other guys I was with, couldn't fathom that. They're like, I can't do that. I can't. They just could not process in their mind, like not just doing it, but the value of having it. They're like, I have money. I need to spend money. Like, why would I have an emergency fund? And it was just a very humbling experience to what Stalen just said of I had no control over where I was born, the family I was born into, and my experience is vastly different. Where I grew up being taught to tithe and save every single time I received an allowance or income of any kind. And this is not in like a bragging way. It's just a fact. Like coming up with $500 for an emergency fund would not be any problem nor a concern for me. And then the fact that these guys not right down the street, but just 10 miles away from me, couldn't even fathom A, doing that logistically, or B, the value of that.
Yeah, we're definitely in our own bubbles financially, I think, but based on where we come from, where we live, who we hang out with now, who we're married to. The first couple chapters of this book, it is refreshing that there's so much nuance and so many caveats in terms of what the right decision is, because we treat finance like just a math or science based study, but it really is like half humanities, half math, and then there's the macro versus the micro perspective on both of those ends of the spectrum. There's like personal finance and how that works versus the way federal governments print money out of thin air. And, there's just a lot of things that you just really need to study for a long time and actually understand history as well in order to get a broad enough understanding to where you can be confident that you're actually making the right decisions for you in the current time period, in the current situation that you might be in. And that's really daunting. I appreciate the fact that this is so philosophical here at the beginning. And I mean, if you look at that graph, people born in the 50s, it's like, why would you invest in stocks? Put it all in bonds and CDs and get interest. And then the people in the 70s, if they did that, they would be the dumbest investors of their whole generation. And it's 20 years apart, it's crazy that only that much time creates such a big gap in, 10 times more for the people in the 70s who would have invested in stocks versus the people in the 50s. That's amazing.
It was a lot. Yeah.
I just was going to deviate because I thought 20 and 21, pages 20 and 21, really interesting. Talking about the labor force participation rate for men over the age of 65.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was interesting.
Yeah. So back in 1880, almost 80% of men over the age of 65 were still working. And then fast forward to 2010, only 22%. So this idea of retirement for everybody is almost brand new. I mean, the Roth IRA wasn't even a thing until 1998. It's crazy to think about. Yeah. So in reality, we're all just guinea pigs with all this stuff, like, shoot, I mean, 50 years from now, there might be something else, Yeah. It's crazy to think about. Right. Yeah.
Who knows?
I think that chart you mentioned, Adam, about or the percentages of like the retirement age and such, that reminded me a lot of the blue zones where people were working like basically up until they passed, essentially, or until they no longer could do their job. But I think that we view like our work now as just different, right? Like, because they're doing just these lifestyle things that feel very natural, And a lot of those blue zones, they're doing very manual labor things, farming and that, where I feel like a lot of our work, it's like, it's good things, but a lot of it might feel more unnatural. We haven't been doing these kind of vocations. Similarly, you said, talking about like how the Roth IRA hasn't been around that long. We haven't been doing these kind of jobs for that long. You look at all of our different job categories. How long has that job category been around for? I mean, Thomas, I guess yours has probably been around the longest, because you're kind of more in
geology's been around a while.
Yeah, rocks. Yeah. Well,
Pangea.
Thomas, what do you do again?
Yeah, I gotta say, like, I actually was thinking that. So, Thomas, go ahead. Tell us what you do.
Samsonite. I knew it started with an S.
What do you mean? What do I do?
In the great words of Robert Zinsky, don't ask me what I do. Let me tell you who I am.
Yeah.
I'm a brother.
I'm a husband.
I'm here to make fun of Rob and his internet.
Aren't you a project manager?
Yeah, but I don't work in geology anymore.
Well, you used to, you used to do construction, but now you don't as much. It's different now, right?
Yeah, I work with the construction industry, but I'm not actually doing the construction.
Okay. But that's, I mean, if you look at like all of our vocations, like that's like all of our jobs, that's probably the closest to something that's been around for a long time.
Yeah, I go out in the field. I turn a wrench every once in a while. Get a little fuel on me every once in a while.
Sweat on your brow.
Good old fashioned benzene and some other chemicals. It's probably why my grandpa's still around, man. He probably touched all sorts of weird chemicals back in the day. They used to wear watches with boron in them, so they lit up at night and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Radioactive chemicals.
Oh, that was in Colorado, actually. I learned about that.
I thought you were going to talk about a free gasoline fighting accident.
Oh yeah. Dude, I love that movie.
Wait.
Oh, dude.
I watched Talladega Nights on a flight today. I always forget how funny that movie is. That movie is so funny.
One of the kind of sneaky ones that always gets me is The Campaign, or literally any of the Austin Powers movies.
Yeah,
You haven't seen them in
baby.
5 years, you forget how awesome they are.
Anyways, we digress.
Anyways, yes. Financial decisions. No, I think everyone shared. Anybody else have any thoughts on chapter 1? I mean, and I'm cool if we still kind of dive into the labor force participation rate that Flez brought up. I thought that was great.
Yeah, we treat retirement as if it's kind of like a right, but it's like only been the last 2 or 3 generations where that's been the case. Like almost all throughout history, you've just had to kind of pull your weight until the end, it kind of feels like.
I brought that up to my dad, and he's like, yeah, we thought that everybody was going to just have a pension. And then you look at the stats on here that he shows about a pension. It's like only a quarter of those age 65 or older had pension income in 1975. And among them, only 15% of household income came from a pension.
Well, I know, like, similarly, Social Security, when it was designed, way more people are collecting on it now than what it was designed for, is my understanding. I don't want to give numbers because I don't know the specifics, but from my understanding that, Social Security as we do it now, way too many people are tapping into it.
Well, I was going to say, it says from the book, when Ida Mae Fuller cashed the first Social Security check in 1940, it was $22.54, or about $416 adjusted for inflation. Not until the 80s were checks an average of or exceeded $1,000 a month adjusted for inflation. So yeah, even Social Security was never really, I don't think, meant to replace a pension or anything like that. And it still can't. I mean, you look at Social Security and then cost of living, it's not even close. Why, we're all on our own now.
Find some gold.
You better hope your investments pay out. And
better get lucky.
I better hope the boomers don't suck it all up during their retirement and go on too many cruises. Leave us nothing.
Let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors.
Ever feel like your life is a reality show without the commentary? Hire your very own reality TV life narrator. They'll follow you around and provide commentary on your most mundane tasks. Watch as Dave hesitates as the dairy aisle. Will he choose almond milk or dare to go full lactose?
Ooh.
And now back to the show.
Speaking of luck, I think that's a good transition to chapter 2, which is titled Luck and Risk. So in this chapter, it addresses the critical roles both luck and risk play in our financial lives. The author highlights how closely intertwined and often indistinguishable these factors are, pointing out that many financial outcomes attributed to skill are often influenced by luck and vice versa. Acknowledging the roles of luck and risk can lead to more humility, better decision-making, and a more realistic approach to personal finance. How do you all assess the role of luck in your own financial successes and failures? And do you think society generally underestimates the role of luck in financial success?
I mean, I think that the Bill Gates example that he uses in here is really cool. Like how precise it almost had to be for that one computer to be at his school.
Yeah, can you give a brief recap of that, the computer that you're talking about, in case anyone listening in has not read the chapter yet?
Yeah, a little quick math. In 1968, I'll just read it because there's so many crazy stats, like the build up to how perfect it had to be for him to get that thing. But in 1968, there were roughly 303 million high school age people in the world, according to UN. About 18 million of them lived in the U.S. About 270,000 of them lived in Washington State. A little over 100,000 of them lived in Seattle. Only about 300 of them attended Lakeside School. So start with 303 million and end with 300, and then one in a million high school age students attended the high school that had the combination of cash and foresight to buy a computer, and Bill Gates happened to be one of them.
Yeah.
So he was the lucky one, right? But then there was a third. It was him and his buddy, but then there was a third guy, and he died mountaineering, which is like a 1 in a million, right? So Bill Gates was the lucky one. His buddy was the risky one. Basically, they both could have been lucky, but one was lucky, one was risky.
I think the book Outliers talks about this too with Malcolm Gladwell. Is that right? I remember feeling about that. Yeah.
I feel like I have to fight the urge to try and assign ownership to a lot of success, because once you assign ownership to success in this realm, you, I think, automatically sort of discount the level at which luck actually contributed to your success. And I feel like that creates a sense of false confidence. So, you know, maybe you get lucky for 2 or 3 years and you start doing things based on the belief that, you know, it was all you. It had nothing to do with the circumstances. And then you become way too risky in your approach to everything. And maybe your ego gets in the way and starts making some decisions that you 2 years ago, before all your success, never would have made. So I think, you know, for me, I think the conservative and probably the smarter way to be is to just try and attribute as much to luck as you can, so that you don't stop analyzing everything for the potential pitfalls that it could present. But I think, I mean, you see it all over the place. You see people that obviously were incredibly lucky and they flaunt what they have as if they did it all themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we could all play this luck game. I mean, we were all born into the families that we have. You know, we were provided all the things we were provided to get through the good schools and to go to college, get a better job. You know, we weren't born into, I don't think any of us were really born into situations that were not privileged.
For sure, that's what it is.
Yeah, it is exactly what it is. Yeah.
I mean, just look at anybody born in the U.S. versus the Congo. I don't know. Choose any country that's it's not the U.S., really.
Yeah, exactly. So really every decision that we make is lucky here, because it's like the fact that you're even here is lucky.
I definitely personally can be very prideful, and there's definitely times where I would say I don't take for granted what my parents, what my mother-in-law have done to get me where I'm at today. Like, no doubt about it. It's not that I'm not taking all of their generosity for granted. Now that I'm fully independent and whatnot, there can be elements of, I share this during the blue zones of the external or internal locus of control, where I can just like, all right, it's on me now. Like I need to make really good decisions, because I need to like set ourselves up for the future, and worrying about, I can worry more as income increases. And there's just an element of like, man, things have always been provided for me, and it can easily go away if I make a couple really stupid decisions. But then at the same time, as we learn in this book, it's like, if we just make the boring, mundane, patient decisions, you know, not move the goalposts of our standard of living, not bet on that huge potential ROI that's extremely risky, where we could lose it all, as Housel gives several examples of that, but do like the really boring, you know, the Reagan Reed in the introduction, the janitor and gas station attendant who just saved and invested in stocks, blue chip stocks, over and over and over. And when he died, he had a net worth of $8 million.
No one knew. Yeah.
And no one knew, you know? So there's just this element of, my parents, my family, my upbringing, like it's very lucky that I was born into that situation. And there's no way I could ever get a big head about that. And at the same time, it can be lost very quickly if I make some very prideful and big-headed, I've come to this level of attainment, like I'm invincible, like some of these hedge fund managers and stockbrokers felt that they were, and lost it all.
I mean, even if you do all the right things, it could also end up like that. That's the crazy part, you know? Like,
yeah, that's
in
a good point.
2008, like Lehman Brothers just totally went bust, right? People lost millions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is that why he called it the most exciting game, or what did he call it?
The greatest show on earth.
The greatest show on earth. Is that why he called it that? I don't really know why he called it that.
Well, I think he called it that because, and this was so fascinating. He goes, in what other industry? All right, we're going back a little bit, but I kind of want to read it word for word. In what other industry? This is page 4. Does someone with no college degree, no training, no background, no formal experience, and no connections massively outperform someone with the best education, the best training, and the best connections? I struggle to think of any. So he uses the example of like a surgeon. It's like none of us could walk in and perform open heart surgery like a trained surgeon. But in the example of Reagan Reed, when he died, he ended his life with $8 million in wealth. And this Merrill Lynch executive, Harvard graduate, MBA, had this $90 million house or something, or it cost $90,000 a month to maintain this house.
Yeah.
And he lost it all. And it's like, how can someone with no education compared to this guy perform better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder to stay humble, I think.
Exactly.
You know,
Garrett, I'm glad you brought that up. It reminds me of like the passage or it's in the Bible, like, I don't know, hundreds of times, I feel like, fear of the Lord, right? So just having great respect and fear of the luck and the risk component, knowing that it's really not in your hands. It's in the higher power's hands. But I don't know. I was thinking about this, what role of luck in your own financial success. Just thinking back to college, I decided to go to Missouri State because it was like my cheapest option. And at the time, I didn't know that I wanted to pursue logistics and supply chain. But later on, I found out that I did. And Missouri State was one of 50 universities at the time that you could get that degree. So like right there, I felt lucky and fortunate to find that career path. And then, you know, with internships, I feel like that really set the stage for my career. And then at that time, I felt like very lucky that I got to work for a Fortune 50 company right out of college. And just so happens that they did really good that year and I got a bonus. And then that allowed me to pay off my debt really, really fast and like kind of catapults you into your future. And it all kind of comes back from like, I know we're going to get into some of the like compounding chapters, but it's like, it feels like everything kind of compounds of the degree or the major, the internships, the job, the bonus, the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, man, before you know it, it's like, wow, you look back and it feels like every little thing, which is all part of a grand plan, really kind of helps set the stage or help you move forward. So I definitely think that there's that compounding aspect that I know we'll get into, I think, in next week's episode. But yeah, just kind of fun to look back and reflect on.
It's a good exercise. Yeah. To look back and reflect on all the things that were out of your control that helped you. It is very humbling for sure.
I agree. Yeah. So maybe that's the takeaway for this episode is just some self-reflection for those listening is how has things outside, whether you want to call it luck, whether you want to call it providence, God's plan, the reality that there are a lot of external forces at play and in the success or failure of not just our financial life, but life in general. So it's probably a good takeaway and a way to end the episode of doing some personal reflection of how external forces and luck have really impacted our trajectory in small ways over the course of time that have really compounded to get you where you are today. So with that, thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Books Brothers podcast. Join us next week as we discuss chapters 3 through 6 from The Psychology of Money, Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness by Morgan Housel. If you haven't yet, go out and get the book so you can better follow along with us. If you have enjoyed listening or benefited from our conversation, Please subscribe, give us a review, and share with a friend that you want to connect deeper with. Lastly, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can reach us by email at connect@booksbrotherspodcast.com or on Instagram @booksbrotherspodcast. Until next week, read, reflect, and connect.